Thank you and welcome to the third public hearing for the inquiry into road tolling regimes. Before I commence, I'd like to acknowledge the Gadigal people who are the traditional custodians of the land on which Parliament sits. I'd also like to pay respects to the elders past, present and emerging of the Eora Nation and extend that respect to other Aboriginals present and those who may be watching proceedings today. Today's hearing is being conducted virtually. This enables the work of the committee to continue during the COVID-19 pandemic without compromising the health and safety of members, witnesses and staff as we break new ground with the technology. And we are getting better at this, I think, but I would ask for everyone's patience through any technical difficulties that we may encounter. If participants do lose their internet connection and are disconnected from the virtual hearing, they're asked to rejoin the hearing by using the same link as that which was provided to them by the committee secretariat. So today we'll be hearing from the tolling customer ombudsman and representatives from the NRMA. Before we commence, I'd like to make some brief comments about the procedures for today's hearing. While parliamentary privilege applies to witnesses giving evidence today, it does not apply to what witnesses say outside of their evidence at the virtual hearing. I therefore urge witnesses to be careful about comments you may make to the media or to others after you complete your evidence. Committee hearings are not intended to provide a forum for people to make adverse reflections about others under the protection of parliamentary privilege. In that regard, it's important that witnesses focus on the issues raised by the inquiry terms of reference and avoid naming individuals unnecessarily. All witnesses have a right to procedural fairness according to the Procedural Fairness Resolution adopted by the House in 2018. There may be some questions that a witness could only answer if they had more time or with certain documents to hand, and in these circumstances, witnesses are advised that they can take a question on notice and provide an answer within 21 days. Today's proceedings are being streamed live, and a transcript will be placed on the committee's website once it becomes available. Finally, a few notes on virtual hearing etiquette to minimise disruptions and assist our Hansard reporters. Could I ask committee members to clearly identify who their questions are directed to? And could I ask everyone to please state their name when they begin speaking? Could everyone please mute their microphones when they're not speaking? Please remember to turn your microphones back on when you're getting ready to speak. And if you start speaking while muted, please start your question or answer again so that it can be recorded in the transcript. Members and witnesses should avoid speaking over each other so that we can all be heard clearly. Also, to assist Hansard, may I remind members and witnesses to speak directly into the microphone and avoid making comments when your head is turned away. So I now welcome our first witness. Mr. Davies, could you please state your name and position title and swear either an oath or an affirmation?
My name's Philip Gregory Davies. I'm the Tolling Customer Ombudsman and CEO of the Tolling Customer Ombudsman Limited. My oath is, I swear that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me God.
Thank you very much, Mr. Davies. And would you like to begin by making a short statement?
Yes, I would, thank you. Very brief. I have been the Tolling Customer Ombudsman since January 2020. So just over about 16 months. Just roughly in a non-COVID year, we generally do about or oversee about 1,000 disputes a year. About 56%, 54 to 56% are disputes coming out of New South Wales, and effectively there are three categories of disputes or complaints that I deal with. There are some more, but these are the general categories: is account management complaints, billing and tolling complaints. The third one is vehicle classification complaints. There's less of those, but they're the main three categories that I deal with. And just so you understand, I'm a national tolling ombudsman. Well, in the sense that it's in relation to Victoria, New South Wales, and Queensland, and I report to an independent board with an independent company, which is a company limited by guarantee, and obviously, as well as being the ombudsman, I'm the CEO of that particular company. Just for sake of completeness, before I took on this role, I was a lawyer for 30 years, still are a lawyer. Have no links with particular consumer groups or alternatively the tolling operators. Haven't ever worked for the tolling operators, and until I joined the tolling ombudsman, I had no cause to deal with them at all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we will begin with questions from the opposition. Mr. Graham.
Great. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Davies, for appearing at the inquiry. I might start off, thanks for that background explanation. I might start off asking you which toll roads do you have jurisdiction over in New South Wales and which ones do you not?
Yes, good question. Sorry, I haven't got it in front of me. Sorry. I might come back to that in a minute if you don't mind.
Yeah, that sounds fine. Just tell us broadly though, which, as I understand it, you cover the transurban operated roads.
Yes,
but not the. I think it'd be helpful if you listed them for us, but then not the. It's still the case that you don't have jurisdiction over the couple of other toll roads outside of that in Sydney. Is that correct?
That's right. Sorry. Yes, that's right. And I will list them. I'm sorry. I've got them written down here somewhere, but I can't find them at the moment. But I will come back to it.
Great. Thank you. And in terms of funding for the role of the tolling customer ombudsman, where does that funding come from?
It's an industry-based scheme. So as I understand it, the industry funds us in terms of the independent tea coal company.
And what's the scale of that funding on an annual basis?
Well, that's sort of commercial in confidence, but the funding per year is about $350,000.
Yep. Okay. Thank you for that. And looking at, and you particularly report each 6 months, I think, on issues that arise in the course of your work.
Well, I actually, just to clarify, I actually report every quarter in relation to that, give a report about the quarter, but I do meet with the toll operator every 6 months to talk about sort of any administrative issues that may be causing consumers problems, or alternatively, and it's usually 6 monthly, but it can be more depending on if I find a particular issue, or alternatively, so that there's a particular difficulty in relation to a particular toll road.
And thinking about the issues that you've been dealing with, that you've been reporting on in Sydney over the last period, what would you like to draw the committee's attention to?
Well, I mean, the two largest ones are the account management ones and the billing and tolling.
Yeah.
And
one, just give us a bit of background on both of those.
Sorry. Well, account management's to do with getting accounts with linked, and sometimes the tolling company, and sometimes that they're suspended, and people don't understand why their accounts are suspended, why they need to have an account for the tolling roads, how they operate, those sort of things. And then the second one is in particular about billing and tolling. And my experience, and it's my experience dealing with consumers, is that generally the issues in relation to imposing tolls for travel on roads is not generally the issue. What the issue is it tends to be the admin charges that are on if something particularly goes wrong. For example, and this is just a very broad example, it may cost you, for example, 26, and this is across the network, not necessarily Sydney, but might cost you, say, $26 to travel. But then if admin fees are added on, it becomes 126 or something in that nature. And that's where people's, pardon the expression, temperature tends to rise significantly, because they don't always understand why and how the tolling operator can impose penalties or administrative penalties.
Yep. And we might, I do want to come back and ask you about that that issue. How much of the complaints you're getting? How much of that is that an issue?
Well, I'd say at least say 40 to 50% would be in terms of administration and tolls.
Yeah. Okay.
Would be roughly that. So if for example we get 1,000 a year and Sydney's about 50%, well that's 500. So there's many in relation to obviously the billing and administration. Yeah.
And looking and how many? Yes, how many are you actually getting out of Sydney? It's roughly about 500 a year.
About 500, but it's about 500 between 1 July 2020 and 30 June 2021. The reason it was 500 though was that there was less traffic in Melbourne and obviously Brisbane in that particular time because of the various lockdowns. So, but historically, it's about 54% of all claims come from New South Wales. Having said that, obviously there's a much more extensive road tolling network in New South Wales than there are Victoria or Queensland.
In some ways, those numbers seem very low. Again, these numbers bounce around because of COVID, but Sydney's hit 1 million toll trips a day.
Yep.
That's really a trickle of complaints that are coming to you. What do you put that down to?
Oh well, I mean, the reason may be a bit of the process. For example, my jurisdiction kicks in, pardon the expression, when basically the toll operator and the consumer have tried to resolve things anyway. You've got to go through a sort of a toll operator complaints network before it comes to me. Then if there's a dispute that can't be fixed, then it basically goes to my jurisdiction. And I think that's one. Secondly, to be quite frank, before I got to this job, I had no idea there was a tolling customer ombudsman. Had absolutely no idea, and saw the ad in the paper and applied. And so we're not particularly high profile in terms of that, and where the board and I are trying to sort of, in a sense, enhance our brand and promote ourselves more in terms of what service we provide, because I think consumers really do appreciate having an independent service that looks at these issues. You'll understand without looking out of school is that in Melbourne, for example, Eastlink have bought that back in-house, the mechanism. And if you bring the mechanism in-house, tends to be, it doesn't look as independent. Now the service they give is obviously good. Don't get me wrong, and I'm not suggesting otherwise. But it's just that perception. But getting back to your original question, it's really, really that we're not as high profile maybe as we be, and we're trying to fix that up. But also, there's some mechanisms. Other mechanisms hoops that consumers have to go through before they get to us, and sometimes consumers decide that they're happy through the sort of arrangements with the toll operator early, so that then they don't need to come to me.
Yeah, but so a couple of concrete reasons why, and it's not, for example, to put another case that either tolls are popular or that there aren't administrative issues out there. These other things are probably the reason why that very low number is there.
Well, as I said to you, I don't. Well, my view is that as I said to you before, that people don't like paying tolls on roads, and I don't. But as well, because you just don't, when you used to travel on some roads. Having said that, do see the benefits of it. But also, as I said, most people seem to be that I come to get not are opposed to paying on tolls on roads. It's more what happens after that.
what reforms would you potentially like to see to overcome some of those barriers? One of the bits of evidence that has been put in front of the inquiry is from the Legal Aid Commission of New South Wales. One of their recommendations is that the role and jurisdiction of the toll customer ombudsman should be expanded to enable it to resolve disputes across all toll operators, to enforce a code of practice, including a framework for managing debt of vulnerable customers. Looking at the barriers that you face doing your job, or looking at how it could be done better, what reforms would you like to see?
Well, I agree. It would be good if all the toll roads were without, giving myself extra job. I think it would be good if the tolling customer was across all toll roads. I think one of the real barriers is obviously funding, in terms of if that was the case, it'd have to be funded. We're a very lean outfit and we run a really good service, but if we're going to be across more than what we are, then I think we would have to be funded to a great extent. Now, having said that, I'm not criticising the funding at the moment. What I'm just saying is that if we had an expanded role, obviously we'd need expanded funding. I think a code of conduct would be very good. I think a critical issue would be, and it's probably in each jurisdiction, that there'd be pricing consistency, because that's an issue when you're travelling on New South Wales roads. And
understood.
Consumers will say to me, I can travel from X to Y, and I travel 40 kilometres, for example. I can travel from Y to Z, getting effectively the same place, same kilometres, and I can get charged $8 for one and $34 for another.
I might just raise one other issue in the time and then hand to my colleague.
Sure.
Historically, in Queensland and Victoria, the administration fees have been fixed.
Yep.
They haven't been fixed in New South Wales. Can you give us any background on that question about how big the administration fees are, or crucially, the fact that there's one letter per toll when it comes to chasing tolls being repaid? Again, one of the issues that we've had raised that is causing real confusion for customers.
Yes. Well, can I just go to that one first? The consolidated toll notices issue is a significant one in New South Wales, because there's so much more administration. People can cope getting one toll notice, but if they start getting 15 toll notices, that's when they're on the phone to me saying, look, what's happening? I'm being flooded. I don't know what to do. My life's going bad, sideways with all these other things. This is the problem. So the consolidated toll notice absolutely needs to be something New South Wales look at. I don't doubt. Victoria and Queensland who had them for some time, and particularly, and they kick in certain circumstances. One of them is when you have a suspended account, and people get upset when they've got a suspended account. But then when they get a number of toll notices, that go on, rather than a consolidated toll notice, you can imagine even in your own circumstances thinking, one I can deal with. If I get 3 or 4, I can't. And so I think that's a really important issue in New South Wales.
Thank you. I might hand to my colleague.
Thank you, and thank you for your appearance today. I was interested in your powers as an ombudsman. What powers do you actually have?
Well, the powers are somewhat limited in the sense that, as I said, it generally kicks in after the toll operators tried to fix the dispute, and then it comes to my jurisdiction. The other thing is under the arrangement, as I understand it, between the government and the tolling operator, once the tolling operator cannot recover the debt from the consumer, it goes to the state organisation to collect those, and then my jurisdiction is finished. So the minute it goes to the state to collect the toll or take proceedings or take action against the consumer, then I haven't got jurisdiction. Now, the way the jurisdiction works, it's an alternative dispute resolution jurisdiction, and so what it effectively does, just so you understand, is after they've gone through the process with the tolling operator to try to do this dispute, they come to me, they lodge a complaint on the website. I sort of mediate in a sense, between the toll operator and the consumer in respect to particular dispute, whether it's about admin fees, whether it's about, vehicle classification. I do that, and then hopefully reach a resolution. And most of the times, I'd say anecdotally, 90%, 95%, we resolve the issue and people are happy. Now, if we can't resolve a decision, or they can't resolve a decision formally, I can make a determination in relation to it, a formal determination, just a written determination between the parties. I write the determination, and then just so that, and this goes to jurisdiction, is that the toll operator is bound by my decision when I make a written decision. The consumer isn't. So the consumer has all its legal rights to pursue another avenue in respect to the dispute. So if they don't, for example, like my decision or think it's right, then they are not bound by it, but the toll operator is.
Do you have the power to seek documents from the operator?
Yes, but obviously there's various limitations on that. But yes, I can ask them for certain documents.
And where is your powers prescribed? Are they in is it in law? Is it in a concession agreement? Is it in a contract? Is it in your company constitution?
It's in there's a scheme or terms of reference that are enshrined in those powers.
Made by whom? Sorry.
But they're effectively made by agreed to by my company, by TCOL and the toll operator in a sense.
And is that affected in a contract between your company and the operator?
Well, there is an arrangement between that, and it's also part of it is enshrined as part of the Constitution. And obviously, the toll operator is the member of because we're a company limited by guarantee, they're a member.
So presumably your jurisdiction does not, sorry, last question, Chair. Your jurisdiction does not extend to toll operators who do not recognise your jurisdiction.
No.
It's a bit of a tautology, yeah.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
No worries. So I think, Mr. Davies, if I could just continue that line of questioning then. So you're appointed by a board of directors, is that correct?
Yes.
And
Right.
that board of directors, which I'm just looking, it's a Mr. Crowhurst, a Ms. Waldron, and a Ms. Shaw.
Yes.
Who are they appointed by?
Well, they're not appointed by anyone. They're a board of directors, but they are Nick Crowhurst is an independent chair. Ms. Waldron is a consumer director, and Ms. Shaw is a industry director, and that's how it's.
Okay, but you're a company limited by guarantee, so
Yes.
right. So you have members, and the members are the toll operators. Is
Yes.
that just Transurban?
Yes.
Okay, so Transurban, as the sole member of that company limited by guarantee,
Yes.
presumably they appoint the directors of that company.
No, they don't. It's an independent company. They don't appoint the directors. The directors are the company was set up as part of a reform coming out of Queensland. What used to happen was the tolling customer was a contractor who just contracted directly with the toll operator, but now it's obviously an independent company where they provide my services, scheme services, as part of the jurisdiction.
Sorry, but just in terms of how company law works, if you've got a company, the directors can't appoint themselves. The members need to appoint directors.
Well, the company started in 2019, Okay, but under the Constitution, under the Constitution, we have we lost our consumer director last year. The directors appointed another consumer director with no influence from the members.
So, okay, so let me get this straight. So the original directors were appointed by the member of the company, but then when a vacancy arose, the directors themselves appointed under the Constitution the additional director.
Yes.
And again under company. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. And I came on board after the company was constituted. So
sure. But under the Constitution, in order for it to be a valid company limited by guarantee, it would need to have the members having control over the constitutional terms. So the members could change the Constitution at any time.
Well, yes, they could. If in at an extra general meeting or an annual general meeting, yes, they could. They could change the Constitution, but I'm not sure how that necessarily then feeds back with their arrangement with the government with what the tolling customer should be, because I understood that as part of the arrangements between them, between the toll operator and the government was that we had a tolling customer ombudsman.
Okay, but given that we have, I know you keep referring to them as the tolling customer, but it is just Transurban. We have Transurban as sole member of this company. That to me looks very much like the company as a subsidiary of Transurban.
No, not at all. Not at all.
And
because
how does it differ then if they're the sole member and they have complete control over the Constitution?
Well, you can look at it that way. I don't see it as that way. I'm completely independent. We've got an independent chair. We've got a consumer director, and we've got a industry director as well.
To be clear, I'm not accusing you of being influenced in any way. What I'm just trying to understand the structure of your particular organisation. Are you a member of ANZOA now, the Australian and New Zealand Ombudsman Association?
No, not at the moment, but I am a member of IOA, which is the International Ombudsman Association, which is the global body, which is, in my view, the premier global body for ombudsmen.
And why has ANZOA not given you membership?
I've got absolutely no idea why ANZOA has not given me membership.
Is it because under ANZOA's requirements, your organisation is not seen as having the necessary level of independence?
Well, that's not what ANZOA has necessarily said to me, but that may be an issue. It's difficult to understand the reasons for ANZOA not giving me membership. That may be one, but that's not. They've not clearly articulated that to me.
Did you have any ombudsman experience before you became the ombudsman?
Well, no, but I've been on independent tribunals for about 15 years before I became an ombudsman. I've been a partner of a international law firm for 13 years. I've run as CEO of a business I've run before. I've done alternative dispute resolution in the federal court, the high court, the VCAT, AAT. So I think I've got more than enough experience to do this, and being a lawyer of 35 years standing, Master of Laws.
Sorry, I'm not questioning the rest of your qualifications. I'm just wondering whether you have ombudsman experience beforehand, and from what you're saying, you don't. But despite that, you would be aware of the way that other ombudsmen are structured and the regulations.
Point of order, Madam Chair. Point of order, Madam Chair. I mean, the witness said he had experience as an independent arbitrator, which is clearly experience leading into becoming an ombudsman. So you can't just categorise it that he said he did not have experience to be an ombudsman. That's not fair. That's misrepresenting his position.
Mr. Mallard, if I could, I did not say that. I said
Yes,
it was clear he was not an ombudsman beforehand. That was what I said. I said you do not have
Well, we'll
experience
check the hands,
as an ombudsman.
we know where you're going. You're undermining the witness, but that's fine.
No, I'm not undermining the witness. Thank you, Mr. Mallard, for your unwelcome commentary. Mr. Davies, again, I'm not saying that you were not qualified. I'm trying to build up an understanding of, so that I can ask my next question,
Sure.
which was whether you believe that the structure of your particular ombudsman role is in line with what we see elsewhere in Australia by those ombudsman organisations that are governed by ANZOA or are members of ANZOA?
Well, yes, but the answer is yes. I do think the requirements are adequate. There are a number of industry ombudsmen around Australia. TIO's one, the telecom one. There's other industry ombudsmen. There's industry ombudsmen all throughout IO, which I'm a member. And just because you're not a member of ANZOA doesn't mean you're not an ombudsman. It doesn't mean you're not a good ombudsman. It doesn't mean the scheme's not a good scheme. For example, I was talking to the Queensland Ombudsman last week, and he happens not to be a member of ANZOA either. He is a member. Sorry, just to finish. He is a member of IOA, like I am, the International Ombudsman Association. And what is significant is the benchmarks that are required for IOA are the same for ANZOA. And so the application's substantially similar, so are the requirements. And I'm certainly a member of IOA, and so is the Queensland Ombudsman.
Do you think that you would benefit, and again, just because I'm very clear, I'm very conscious of the point that Mr. Mallard raised.
Yep.
I am looking at the structure of your organisation, not you as an individual. Do you think that your role as an ombudsman would be improved by being subject to independent regulation? So, for example, some sort of I guess, a legislative framework.
Well, no, I don't. But would I be concerned about being subject to a legislative framework? No, I wouldn't. But I think that it works well. I'm very independent. We resolve 95% of the disputes we have. It's a very good service. Consumers engage with it very well. They understand it's a free service. Look, frankly, would we prefer having more members if that's where you're going? Yes, we would, because we'd like to be operating a scheme across all toll roads with all toll operators. But the scheme works. The scheme is working. I'm sitting in the hot seat every day. Since 2020, the scheme has worked. It's been particularly difficult for consumers under a COVID environment, and the scheme is still working under a very difficult COVID environment where people are feeling pressurised by just life in general, but also by bills, by charges, all those sort of things, and the system is working really well. From what I can gather, when I talk to anecdotally to consumers, the system's working even better now. It's an independent company. That's not to say that Mr. Arnold, as the previous ombudsman, wasn't good. He was very good, but we had different styles, and it was a different arrangement. I think the present arrangement works well. It's very independent. No one's ever tried to influence me one way or the other in relation to any of this. If they decide we'd have a legislative oversight, I don't fear that. In sense, I work on various tribunals where there is legislative, and it makes no difference if you're an independent arbiter. It makes absolutely no difference as long as you know what the rules are. I think it works perfectly fine at the moment, and I've been sitting here for 2 years almost now, and I think the system works really well. And it's a good alternative dispute resolution scheme.
Thank you. What steps have you taken to add the other toll operators to the scheme?
What steps have we taken? Well, once again, we're at the moment we're full capacity in terms of funding, in terms of everything else. Look, we in the future may go back to for example, Eastlink and say to them, you've bought it in house. Perhaps would you contemplate again, joining the scheme? We want to, we've got a strategy of growth, if you can put it that way. Funny thing to put for the ombudsman, but we'd obviously like to have a greater share of the pie in a sense, and so we'd be keen to do that. But obviously, as I said, the limitation is funding, and obviously, if that was the case, if we added more toll operators, then I suspect I would need another ombudsman. I don't think one person could necessarily do that. But would we rule it out? No, we wouldn't. In fact, our strategic plan is looking at those sort of growth objectives. But once again, we've only started as an independent company in 2020. We've been hit like every small business with COVID, and you'll all understand that, about just bedding down issues. At the moment, it's difficult enough getting having all our directors in one room to actually discuss strategy for the last 2 years. So it's difficult. Yeah. But yes, would we be keen to expand? Absolutely, of course we would.
Can I ask, how many days a week do you work in the ombudsman role? Is it full time now? Is it?
No, it's not. But having said that, it's supposed to be 3 days a week. There's no week. There is no week that I work 3 days a week. In terms of, I work much more. You know what part-time work? Everyone understands that. Instead of working the 3 days, you work 5. I'm lucky because I work from home. I'm on obviously tribunals and boards as sort of other fill-in, and I have a phone which I answer every day of the week. If it's called.
Do you have any staff?
Yes, I have a very capable staff member, Michelle, who's been with the tolling ombudsman for about 15 years, and she is a terrific resource for me.
And is she full-time?
Well, once again, it's the part-time, full-time thing. She works 3 days a week, but I think if I ask Michelle, in truth, she works 4 or 5 days a week. But that's all part of it. We appreciate that, and we don't work Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and then say we're not answering the phone Thursday, Friday. It doesn't happen. We get emails and we work like everyone else. We work weekends sometimes when we get things. We just have to, part of the job.
Understand. Just a final question. What percentage of your funding is spent on staff and your own salary? Are you able to tell us?
No, I couldn't tell you off the top of my head, sorry. But
if you could take that on notice, that would be very helpful. Thank you. I'll now pass on to the government for questions. Is that you, Mr. Farlow, or Mr. Mallard?
Yes, it is. Thank you, Madam Chair. Just interested, we've spent a lot of time in terms of your role and the processes in your role, but I'm more interested in terms of the outcomes that have been achieved and that through your role as well. You were talking about 95% resolution of issues. What does that look like effectively in your standard issue that's raised by a customer? What does it look like when it's resolved?
Well, what happens is that there's accommodation reached between the toll operator and the consumer. For example, we may, and this is just an example. Is that there might be a dispute between the toll operator and the consumer in relation to both administrative charges and the basic tolling fee. And where we get to, hopefully, is that the toll operator decides to excise or get rid of the administrative charges, and then we come in and have a discussion about how much the consumer will pay in terms of the basic tolling amount, and then if they reach an accommodation, that's the end of the story. As I said, if they can't reach an accommodation, then I write a determination. But I've only had to write very few determinations in the last couple of years.
I think you were talking, Mr. Davies, before about the standard problem is that you might get a $28 toll bill, which most people find acceptable. Then with fees and charges and administrative charges on top, it becomes $128. So I take it through that process. Do you get to all of that $100 additional sort of taken off? Is that where it sort of ends up? Or is it some sort of concession that maybe it's one administrative charge that's applied to all of those tolls rather than the $100, so to speak?
Well, mostly all the administrative charges are waived. It doesn't happen in every circumstance, but can I say I consider the toll operators being really benevolent through COVID in terms of the settlements that they'll agree to. They seem to have done that. Now, having said that, most of my existence as tolling has been under the COVID arrangements. But most times the administrative charges are reduced significantly. Sometimes 100%, sometimes it depends and obviously we get various disputes and various admin charges, but most of the time the way they're resolved is the admin charges are reduced significantly and sometimes 100%.
And Mr. Davies, I take it when you actually make those determinations as well, you take into consideration a person's ability to pay and their own financial circumstances in those instances where you do make a determination?
Absolutely. And obviously too, the toll operator has payment installment plans and things like that. And sometimes I'll obviously in determinations insist that they enter into a payment installment plan. Because it's an ombudsman's role, even before I make the determination, I may have to say, toll operator, sharpen your pencil. I don't think this is a good enough offer. Or alternatively, once again, I'll say to the consumer, as an objective observer, I think what the toll operator has offered is reasonable or sensible, and then it's ultimately their decision to make. But I try to sort of, and intervention is the wrong word, but be active in terms of doing that, because sometimes I'll say that people get caught in their own position, and if you can at least say from an objective view, I think that's good to the consumer, or alternatively you say to the toll operator, no, I think this person, for example, is in real financial strife. They've been on the phone to me 4 times. I understand, they've got medical bill. Or we need to do something else here, or we need to pull it back a bit, or whatever. That and that's part of the role.
So Mr. Davies, you were talking before about the role, and effectively that it's not a high-profile ombudsman's office. It's not something that people necessarily know about. And you talked also about the process people have to go through before they come to you and trying to resolve it with the toll operator. Do they have a referral service at some point? Is there a trigger in their system whereby they've been going back and forth with a client and then they say you should go to the ombudsman? Is there some sort of system that's outlined like that?
No, absolutely, and they do recommend that if they can't resolve it with the consumer, yes, that they go to the tolling, that they do the tolling customer ombudsman. They do refer them directly through. But the process of that is then the consumer will come to me, and then, as I said, they will lodge a tolling complaint on their website, which is very user friendly. It's also you can get translation of all the forms, all those sort of things as well. And we have a translation service if people need assistance as well. So it's fairly user friendly. But yes, the tolling company will refer them through. Say, ring the tolling ombudsman, which, as I said, I've got a separate phone which comes directly to me. I'll take calls on my personal line if I have to. That's all part of it. And secondly, they get on the website and then lodge a claim, and obviously the minute they lodge a claim, we send an email back saying received your claim. We'll start the process.
Right. Thanks, Mr. Davies. I'll hand over to my colleague, Mr. Mallard.
Well, thank you, Mr. Farlow, and thank you, Mr. Davies, for appearing today and your evidence. I'm interested in the industry model ombudsman that you referred to. I came back from New Zealand with a $7,000 mobile phone bill with Optus, and couldn't resolve it with Optus and went straight to the telco ombudsman, which I didn't know was there. But someone told me to go there. Minute Optus found out I was doing that, they immediately came to the table to negotiate. Is that a similar sort of mechanism that you've got in place? And I assume that telco ombudsman is industry funded. I'm not certain, but I think wasn't sure about that. But maybe you can enlighten me there.
No. I understand it's industry funded. The telecom industry ombudsman. Yes, and look.
Well, the minute they were involved, Optus immediately. I mean, I paid $2,000 in the end over a period of time. They immediately came to the table straight away.
Yeah. Look. The way I can describe it without being pejorative is that it's less clunky when we're dealing with it, when the ombudsman's involved, because we tend to go to, rather than, because consumers go to call centres and they might get three different people if they ring 3 different days.
Yeah, I know.
Nature of the business. Whereas we have particular people that I deal with the toll operator who deal with my administrative assistant Michelle through various things, but I can also go higher if I think there's a problem. For example, at one stage there was a person I was really worried about that kept ringing up, and I thought they were really, they were on the edge, and I was really worried that they were going to do self-harm. And so I said that, I rang someone at the toll operator and said, listen, we just got to, this is one we've just got to let go. I'm really concerned about it. I was, just about to call the police, to be honest, because that's how worried I was about it. But I rang the toll operator and said, we need to do something about it, and it was fixed. So yes, it tends to sharpen people's focus, I think, in terms of the tolling operator when they come to me. Having said that, look, my experience with the toll operator is pretty good, and as I said, during COVID, I think they've been particularly benevolent, but that doesn't mean that, as I said, sometimes I have to say, sharpen your pen. I don't think that offer was good enough, or that sort of stuff.
Yeah. So your arbitration is binding on the toll operator, not binding on the consumer.
Not binding on the consumer. So in a sense, it's almost a free kick for the consumer, because it's free. The service is free. It's taken to some degree out of their hands in terms of they're not negotiating themselves with the toll operator. And thirdly, they think, well, some grey old balding bloke who's independent is in there batting for me, and it's taken one of my worries off my shoulders.
Two grey old balding blokes around. Earlier in questioning Mr. Graham put it to you, your lower number of disputes is because of he used the word barriers that are in the way to get to you. But I mean, when I had my dispute, I had to show evidence that I had tried to resolve it directly, and that was just emails and record of phone calls with the telco before the ombudsman took it up. And that's standard practice, whether it be a government ombudsman or private ombudsman, that you need to show that you've tried to resolve it.
Yeah, look, and barriers is the wrong word. Is it sometimes clunky dealing with it outside my jurisdiction? Absolutely, because they've got call centres. But if you have a dispute with the bank, it takes you through, and you might get different people and everything else. If you have that, so I don't think that the fact that it's clunky means that they don't come my way. I think that the profile of the quite frankly, the profile of the tolling customer ombudsman's not strong enough, and I prefer it to be stronger.
Would you support a recommendation in this inquiry to encourage? We can't bind unless we do legislation. Encourage all all tolling operators within New South Wales to. We can't influence the rest of the country yet. To sign up to your ombudsman, industry ombudsman.
Well, I think that'd be good if we had one place where we resolve these disputes. There's consistency, there's transparency. They can see the decisions on the website. I report every quarter in relation to disputes and what's happening. I speak to the toll operators, as I said, twice yearly, if not more, and it's certainly more during COVID, in relation to issues that have have caused problems.
Okay.
And things like that.
I've got two.
Sorry.
No, we're running out of time, and
Yep.
my colleague Wes Fang wants to ask some questions as well. I just two more
Yep.
lines of questioning. Sorry,
Sorry,
do you want to take that? So you finish.
Sorry, I can go beyond 11 o'clock if required.
Noted. We had a lot of evidence over this inquiry, and it has alarmed me and government members as well. Is that tolling operators is a sort of quasi credit card operation going on that we didn't realise, and it has caused some hardship. There's been suggestions, and you sort of alluded to it, I think, when we talked about industry code, that you should apply credit industry codes or laws, what do you like to call it, credit card oversight onto the little beeper in your car that is actually almost a type of credit card. Do you think that's where we should be recommending applying consumer laws around credit to the toll operators?
Well, I'm not a toll operator, but I think if anything that helps consumers in that regard, then we should consider whether it be the optimum. I'm not sure, but certainly we should.
There's been some. My last question, and I'll flick over to Wes. There's been some suggestion or questioning around your office's independence, not your personal independence, but the office's independence. And you responded, quote, "No one has ever tried to influence me," unquote. You're under oath, so you're saying no toll operator or anyone else has ever tried to influence your arbitration.
Can I say no toll operator has ever tried to influence it? My board has never tried to influence me. Consumers sort of try to influence, if you know what I mean.
Oh, of course they do, yeah.
They're caught because they're caught in it and they're wrapped up.
But I'm talking about the people that.
No one has ever tried to influence me. And why would I be in this job, being a lawyer of 35 years, being on tribunals, and if I could be influenced, you only get one shot at your integrity.
Yeah.
Everyone, and sorry, but it's not something that I would. And quite frankly, if someone did try to influence me in that way, what's the point of being the tolling customer ombudsman? You may as well resign.
Indeed. I'll pass over the last few minutes to my colleague Wes Fang. Thank you for answering my questions.
Thank you very much, and thank you for appearing today. And look, I appreciate your offer for staying past 11 o'clock, but you've been very generous with your time today. So I've only got a couple of questions to ask, and then we'll let you depart. But I just wanted to find out, have you kept any records by any chance about the amount of money that you may have actually saved consumers through your actions, i.e., say there was a $125 notice to a customer from a tolling company that you've actually had reduced down to, say, half or had, an admin fee waived. Obviously, you've saved customers an amount of money. Have you kept a track of how much that has been over your term and tenure? And what positive outcomes have been achieved for customers?
Well, I haven't looked at how much we've saved people money, but it's a good thing. I might actually say that to my board. It might be a good indicator of how the service is going. But we have obviously saved a lot of money, but only anecdotal. I couldn't tell you the figure. Sorry, and the second question was?
Oh, just about some of the stories of how much you've actually saved consumers. Like, what's the largest amounts that you can actually recall? And I just, there was it was alluded that you may have been influenced, like the Honourable Shane Mallard indicated. But obviously, if you're saving customers money through your actions, then clearly that's not the case.
Well, to be frank, most of the disputes I deal with aren't what we call a lot of money, but they're obviously a lot of money for the consumers. So it's not huge amounts of money that we're talking about generally, unless something goes really awry and someone just and they keep travelling on toll roads, for example, for a significant time when their account's suspended. So those are the sort of things. My satisfaction here in terms of this is that as I said, about 90-95% of our disputes come to a successful resolution. The other issue is that there's certain benchmarks in relation to resolving disputes internationally, and that's IOA, but the general ADR benchmarks is I think the acceptable is 45 days. Most of our disputes are certainly resolved within about 20 to 30 days, quite successfully. So, therefore, you're beating the global benchmarks in terms of resolving. 90 to 95% is a pretty good rate, given that sometimes you get people who just won't settle, because that's the nature of the beast sometimes, unfortunately, but they won't settle, and then they take other avenues. So really, it's more, can you provide the service within or better than the global benchmarks? Yes. Can you resolve 90 to 95% of disputes? Yes, you can. We're hitting that target. Are you in a sense providing an appropriate and proper service for New South Wales, Victoria, and Queensland? Yes. So that's the sort of the success measures, not in terms of how much money we've saved people. I know that someone may look at it in a different way, but that's not how. And also, we're a company, not for profit, company linked by guarantee, so we're not sort of focused on the money aspect of it.
No, thank you, Mr. Davies, and that was the end of my questions. And I just note that when we say it's not a lot of money, to some people that could be a lot of money, and I'm very cognizant of that. That even though you might have only saved a few dollars, it might be the difference for some people, and so in that instance, I very much think that you may have made a difference in people's lives. But that's the end of my questions, and I thank you very much for your time.
And you're absolutely right. Sometimes it makes a huge difference to consumers if they're pensioners or they're disabled, or that if for example, it's 26 and then the administrative fees another 80. If you can knock off that $80, that's the difference between them, making it during the week or the month or not. So it's
unfortunately, our time has expired. We might end on that note that I think we can all agree on. So thank you very much, Mr. Davies, for appearing and being generous with your time. To the extent that you took questions on notice, I believe there were a couple. The Secretariat will be in touch, and then there will be 21 days to respond to that. We may also send you some supplementary questions, but again, the Committee Secretariat will be in touch. Thank you very much for your time. The committee will now break until 11:15. We'll be back with our next witnesses. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd like to welcome our next witnesses. If I could ask each of you to please state your name and position title, and then either swear the oath or affirmation. That would be fantastic. And I'll start with you, Mr. Giltonen.
Thank you, Chair. Robert Gilt, Policy and Public Affairs at NRMA, and I will recite the oath. I swear that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help me God.
Thank you very much. And apologies if I get this wrong. Setskowitz.
My name's Wal Setkowitz, Principal Advisor, Infrastructure and Economics at the NRMA, and I'm going to recite the affirmation. Just get the reading. So I solemnly, sincerely and truthfully declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Thank you very much. And would one of you like to start by making a short opening statement?
Sure. Thank you, Chair. On behalf of the NRMA, I would like to thank the committee for the invitation to contribute to this inquiry. A safe and functional road network is one of the primary underpinnings of our economy, critical in supporting the safe and efficient movement of people and goods. In regard to tolled motorways, the NRMA would like to bring three opportunities in particular to the attention of the committee. Firstly, we are now close to having a connected and functional motorway network, which provides the opportunity to look at pricing as a total network concept. Secondly, more transparency around the conditions for price setting and independent oversight of concessions would improve public knowledge and confidence. And thirdly, a toll-free period of 1 month for new motorways or major enhancements to existing motorways would give motorists the opportunity to utilise and evaluate potential benefits. Tolled roads are a key component of the road network, providing access to important institutional and private funding to ensure we have access to the best available and most efficient road infrastructure for motorists and also freight and logistics. Over the past several decades, governments have increasingly relied on private sector investment to support roads and transport, bringing projects forward and increasing travel choice. Private sector involvement supports broad economic outcomes and will continue to play a vital role alleviating pressures on government budgets so that public funds can be increasingly directed at social infrastructure and services. While tolled roads are a key component of the road network, development has mostly been on a project-by-project basis, which has given rise over time to pricing inefficiencies, given new road and transport projects and therefore dated assumptions. Pricing structures are effectively anchored to concessions and have been put in place to be reflective of project-specific considerations, which has increasingly brought to light disparate pricing, inconsistencies, and inequity for users. Primarily due to geographic location, NRMA members in Western Sydney, Southwest, Northwest, and the Blue Mountains feel most disadvantaged by toll roads. Given current pricing structures, members in Western Sydney in particular are more likely to actively avoid using toll roads than in any other area. Further to these issues, there is a lack of public understanding around price setting for toll roads. Less than 10% of NRMA members understand how tolls are calculated. Governments over many years have sought to address pricing inconsistencies through a number of ad hoc initiatives, including rebates and reductions. However, it is becoming increasingly necessary to look at broader and more substantive reform with a holistic view of toll roads, as well as the entire road network. The overwhelming majority of NRMA members support tolling reform. Broad road pricing reform based on a more progressive model, underpinned by a user pays approach, provides the opportunity to holistically and continually consider current and emerging mobility needs, while consolidating and rationalising current fixed, distance-based and time of day tolling charges. Most NRMA members support a user pays approach to tolling. While toll road consolidation and rationalisation could provide significant community and economic benefits, the NRMA ultimately supports a network-wide road pricing model which factors in distance, location, time of day and vehicle type, where price adjustments can be considered over time to ensure sustainable funding for roads and transport infrastructure and maintenance. Such a model could also benefit from multiple trip pricing caps. With the New South Wales Parliament recently passing the Electric Vehicles Revenue Arrangements Bill 2021, we now have legislation in place to support such reform. The NRMA is committed to continuing to work with the New South Wales Parliament, private toll road operators, policymakers, and other stakeholders to progress network-wide pricing reform and other key issues to improve equity and provide motorists a simpler proposition. The NRMA is equally committed to educating and publicly highlighting the need for change to lower some of the barriers that effectively need to be overcome to support acceptance and implementation. Once again, I would like to thank the committee for the invitation to contribute to this inquiry and for considering the NRMA's submission.
Thank you very much. I will start with questions from the opposition. Mr. Graham?
Great. Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the NRMA for your submission. I might start in some ways with the most straightforward of those propositions you put, the toll-free period. NRMA has been a consistent advocate, and up until recently, the government did have a toll-free period as these roads open. That's now stopped. Just give us a quick rundown of the benefits of those toll-free periods as NRMA sees them, including the safety benefits.
Well, Secretary NRMA, it's always been a policy to support, a one month free period. The government undertook a review of the tolling arrangements in I think it was 2005. I think it was loosely called the Richmond Report. One of the recommendations came out of there was to actually, for any new roads, tolling roads, to have a 1 month free period. The NRMA supported that on the basis that we feel that our members should actually drive the road when it's first open, see what the benefit of this compared to using the existing road network. So we think that's critical, and it also will allow the public to gain confidence that the road which was opened is a good road. It is a safer road than being on the alternatives. And we also feel that it's a good way to actually increase public confidence in the usage of the road. And I think it gives an assessment to the individual user that, okay, so we're going to be charged X dollars for this section of road. You know, am I going to get X dollars of benefit from that road?
Great.
And being able to have a first go at it and make an assessment as to which road they would prefer to use I think is very important. And obviously these roads, because they are high quality roads in the sense that they're built to high specification, they are actually safer. And I think NRMA in general supports safe roads irrespective of what type of road
Thank
it
you
is.
for that answer. I might turn to the second issue you raised in that opening statement, which is these tolls don't fall equally across Sydney. It's really the southwest, the northwest, western Sydney that's bearing the burden of these tolls. They're already at a time distance from the sort of good jobs in the centre of Parramatta or Sydney, but then the tolls on top. That feedback you've had would be from your members as a membership organisation. Just give us some more details about that issue about how equally tolls fall across Sydney.
We did a survey a couple of years ago where we sought to find what our members thought about the way they manoeuvre around the Sydney motorway network. So there was a concern that it's those most distant motorists who need to travel on these roads, and in some cases, as in the northwest sector, the ability to use public transport is quite limited. So that was also a factor. I think our members also had the concern that because there are a lot of people moving further out because to afford to buy houses, which is further away from their jobs, that it raises concerns for them about how they deal with the issues. I also think obviously the way these motorways have been put together on an ad hoc basis hasn't contributed to people actually determining what's good value in terms of what type of road they would travel on.
You've made that point strongly in your submission. One of the issues that I've put to multiple government ministers, and no one will answer this, they duck for cover every time it's raised, is how much are commuters actually paying? For example, over the life of the WestConnex project, how much in total will come out of the pockets of drivers? How many billions of dollars, how many tens of billions of dollars will come out of the pockets of drivers in Western Sydney? Can you give us any guidance on that, or perhaps a response to this? Shouldn't we know that as part of your call for transparency? Shouldn't we know how much drivers are paying?
Yeah, we should, because obviously transparency is also a very important argument in this context, because people need to know what they're being charged for and what the benefit is. And then this gives people a decision to make should they use the toll road because it's quicker, it's safer, they get to their end point sooner, and they're able to sort of maneuver around the road system a little bit easier. So as against the cost. So at the end of the day, we want this thing to be transparent in the sense we want people to understand that if they're paying X, as I've said before, they want at least X dollars in benefit for it.
Yeah. And your submission calls for, you set out a range of principles, which are, I think, really useful guidance for the committee. One of those principles is independent and transparent oversight of what toll prices are charged and the tolling regimes. How would you imagine this working? Just give us some more details about that independent and transparent oversight.
So once the deal has been struck and they've worked out the parameters in terms of what they're going to pay, it'd actually be good to get an assessment from an independent operator as to whether the way that the the contract is put together is in the public interest, and there is a benefit to the public of this road having been built. We think it's critical that people understand the need for roads and also understand they're actually getting a benefit out of it. And I think just an independent check is saying it does pass, the test, and people will gain from using that road. I think that's quite important.
Yeah, so one suggestion has been that IPART might be the body that performs that test that this is of public benefit. Do you specifically support IPART, or are you more generally advocating for an independent check of that sort?
We would advocate for an independent. It doesn't have to be IPART, but someone that's independent and away from the normal day-to-day dealings of contractual arrangements with government.
Yep, fantastic. I might hand at that point to my colleague.
Yes, thank you. One of the points which I think Mr. Giltoner made in his opening statement was about the migration of traffic to local roads in the wake of the establishment of tolls. Can you talk to us more about what you noticed?
Rob, you want to?
Sure, thanks, Mr. Mickey. I think in previous inquiries and what we've seen progressively occur is that there is obviously concerns, particularly with the freight industry, and the price setting of tolls is becoming unsustainable for some of the members, particularly who live in the northwest, the southwest, and western Sydney. And the issue that we have is ultimately those roads are put in place to reduce congestion and reduce travel times for motorists, and we want to be encouraging the use of those particular roads, not putting in place impediments that forces traffic onto local roads, because that's where you create congestion and also start to impinge on the productivity benefits. And so anything that we can do to increase the use of tollways would be supported by the NRMA, because that's the strong feedback that we generally get from the membership.
So am I right in just interpreting what you said there as saying that you think that the way in which freight is priced on toll networks is prohibitive and causes them to have to use local roads?
That's some of the feedback that we certainly have from the freight industry in particular. And so this gives rise to one of the issues that have come to bear over time with new motorways and toll pricing, is that we have such a patchwork in place now. We have inefficiencies across the network, and if you look at one example, it may make sense for a particular consumer, motorist, or a freight company to use a toll road, but on another case, it may make no sense for them to use a toll road because they view the cost as prohibitive. And so ultimately moving to a more progressive and more equitable model can incentivize everyone, including motorists and freight, to use the motorway networks and not be stuck on the local road network, which is essentially not what we want.
As per, I guess that's a very nice segue into the proposal for a network pricing model. Do you think that network pricing model should be constructed with the objective of simply recovering the cost of construction, or is that something that you think we should be using to mediate demand for roads?
Well said, I think that you need to have both, because obviously if you are investing in the network, you obviously and you're taking you've got a risk profile, you need to get obviously the rate of return back and cost recovery. So but also it's more importantly, and I think where the emphasis is being able to manage the system better now, to put in place different pricing structures that'll enable greater utilization of the road network, obviously maybe spreading the amount of journeys over a 24-hour period, because at the moment, as we're all aware, there's about 2 hours in the morning and 2 hours in the afternoon where there's massive congestion, and obviously people are trying to get to their various to work, to school, etc., and that's causing a lot of stress in the system. If some are able to sort of spread that demand over the time of day, that would provide a better outcome, and I think that's very important to look at ways that we can actually improve the utilization of that road network, not just for certain periods of the day.
So for other forms of network infrastructure, be it telecommunications or otherwise, in which there is monopoly ownership. You have the ACCC set the prices. How do you envisage price setting to take place under your proposal for network access? Do you think that that should be decided by the toll operator in partnership with the government, or should there be someone independent sitting over them?
Well, it's a very important question. I think there needs to be a discussion about what are the prices that people would like to see being used for this purpose. I think we need a serious discussion of all the relevant issues or people's input into it. NRMA has always been cognizant that in the wider road user charging debate that we need massive consultation and discussion with various stakeholders to make sure that we get the best outcome for everybody, because it's imperative that we get to that process. And as the committee knows, it's a complex issue, and obviously there are no easy fixes, no easy solutions. But the more we can understand people's needs and how they want to use the network, I think that we'd be in a better space than to make some of those answers to those questions.
Do you have a view as to what would be a reasonable profit that should be built into the pricing structure in a network model? And that's, look, again, I mean, it's not a criticism of people's desire to earn a return on their capital, they should. But there are multiple models. Electricity networks have one set of return, telecommunications have another, water have another. Like, what do you think is the appropriate benchmark that we should be thinking about here?
Well, there are various models out there. You talked about water and electricity. I know in that area there's something called a regularly asset base where the regulator actually monitors the capex and opex of the provider and provides them with prices for a certain period of time. And obviously the operators can make enhancements to the network, etc., and seek those prices. So that's one particular model that could be looked at. I'm not saying that we should go down that path, but there are a number of ways you can actually try and address this issue.
Indeed, and I'm wondering whether or not the NRMA has a view as to which one it prefers, or is it more of the case at this point that you are more at a concept stage?
We're more at a concept stage, to get people to the table to talk about the issues.
You made a reference, Mr. Giltenham, in your opening statement about the interactions between this and road user charges on electric vehicles. Can you expand on that point? How do you see the two as related?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Mr. Mookie. Ultimately, we are looking, to reform road pricing and put in price a more equitable and a better structure so that we have more certainty around financing new roads, funding roads, and the charges that we put in place for those particular roads. The most recent legislation that was passed by the Parliament in regard to electric vehicles now effectively is consistent with what we are saying, in that it puts in place a pricing mechanism to charge by distance. Ultimately, that is a stepping stone to full road pricing reform. However, our strong view is that distance is not the only thing that needs to be considered in sort of a panacea type approach. You need to consider a whole range of factors to provide equity across the system, because if you have a motor, for example, and I'll stick to motorways given the inquiry, if you have someone using the M2 and M7, they're going to be travelling some distance if you compared to the Eastern Distributor, for example. And so there's a whole bunch of factors that need to be considered depending on where people live. Or do they need to use a toll road that's been funded by the private sector? Are they using public roads? There's just so many considerations, and that's a huge piece of work that needs to be done. But ultimately, we do feel that moving towards a road pricing scheme, which is the underpinning of that legislation, is the right way to go.
And just moving on a bit, in terms of one of the issues that has been raised repeatedly in this particular inquiry is why certain toll roads rise by 4% per annum, regardless of inflation or wages price growth. Does the NRMA think it's appropriate that new toll contracts for new toll roads are signed with a 4% escalator per annum?
I'm happy to take that. Yeah, sure. Look, whenever a toll road is put in place and you're after capital investment or institutional funds to bring forward the construction of that asset, you have to look at the government input initially, also the starting toll price, where that is set, the toll increase that is either CPI or indexed at 4%, and then the concession length. But all of those things ultimately interchange. And if you look at bringing down government investment initially, then those other levers obviously have to increase. Whereas the traditional model has been government will put a significant funding envelope on the table up front, and that would obviously have a kind of better impact on those other levers. But ultimately, if you change one thing, it's going to change some other part of the network design or the network model. And so it's not really appropriate for us to say, because again, we don't have full transparency over what the concessions look like. If we could look at the detail, then I'm sure we could come up with some assumptions and recommendations, but ultimately those contracts and those concession periods are put in place with the government and any private equity that needs to be put in place to build those roads.
So I'm hearing from your answer there, Mr. Gordon, you think that was struck with between the government or decided by the government as a way in which to attract private capital, and that was the motivation.
Not exactly. I'm saying that where there's private capital and where there's propensity for the private sector to contribute to road funding, all of those things need to be considered as part of the concession contract,
sure,
and the concession agreement.
And if at the outcome of all that, we result in a scenario in which we've signed a contract that goes for 40 plus years with 4% per annum increases when inflation is at 1.5, the NRMA has no objections to that on behalf of the motorists you represent. Is that what you're saying?
No, I would say that we need to look at the full detail of the contract, including upfront capital costs by the private sector, by the government, the concession period, the escalation. All of those factors contribute to whether we would determine if a road is able to be built and it's provides a cost benefit ratio of 1+.
I think my time has expired, Chair.
Thank you. If I could start just by asking about this interaction between the road user charge and our existing toll roads. We've heard some evidence and commentary during this inquiry about the confusing interaction between car registration, the toll amount, the potential road user charge. There's a whole bunch of different amounts being imposed on motorists. How do you see the road user charge interacting with the existing toll charges, given that the government has entered into those agreements with toll road operators?
Let me first of all, let me first of all state that it's NRMA's position that a broad road user-based charging system, all motoring charges and levies need to be on the table for discussion to bring about the a change in the pricing. We see that as very important, because at the end of the day, we want people to get the benefit of using the road, and they're paying for it. So to us, that's critical. And if you decide to just look at one thing like rego and not stamp duty, etc., it sends confusing messages, because at the end of the day, a motorist gets in the car and they drive from point A to point B. You pay for that. So whether you pay it through fixed charges or through buying petrol, etc., it's better to include all those things together and get a broad consensus. The tolling application, that is a form of road user charging, and obviously that's a discussion that we need to have if we go down the broad road user charging part, how that's going to sit in there as well. It's obviously an issue that needs to be discussed, and obviously need to work out what are the alternatives going forward. And obviously we've got to have those discussions with with the government, and toll owners, operators, etc.
So in an ideal world, though, we would have the ability to renegotiate those contracts with those tolling operators so that we could have that overall discussion. Is that
well? you mentioned in an ideal world, yes, there would be, there would be some discussion about that. Now, whether the ideal world actually comes about,
Yeah.
that's not a
Yeah,
question.
no, I understand. I think just sort of coming off of that, there was a discussion in the opening statement about, and I don't think this was explicitly said, but some other witnesses have said, with the technology that now exists, it is possible to do distance charging. You can do time of day charging. You could do, a variable amount based on the weight of the vehicle and the amount of impact it has on the roads, et cetera, et cetera. All of that is technically possible, if not right now, then we would imagine quite soon. How does that, though, fit in with the objective of having as transparent and simple a road user charge or tolling regime as possible?
Well, if for argument's sake, if we generate, say, one charge and then we don't have to have a universal charge across the network. We can modify prices to reflect time of day pricing or different type of vehicles, etc., etc. So that's all possible. I think things, obviously technology, data capture is improving, and people's where they travel to can be observed, and I think technology can be used to try and measure that, and then provide, and then we look at it in totality, because we're looking at what the benefits are of, in a holistic sense. We're not looking at the individual bits, because that would be just a nightmare to go through all those permutations. But we want to see how things work out and what the benefit is to the community of making sure that we've made the right decisions as to how we price the network and how we want people to move on that network.
Are you aware of the Transurban Run scheme in the United States that's effectively, as you're driving, it's adjusting the price per kilometre that you're driving, and there are signs set up that say, go this way and it will cost you this amount at this time, go this way, it will cost you this amount. Are you aware of that scheme, and is that something you've been watching and have a view on?
I've heard of the scheme. I don't know it in totality, but I suppose that's an option that obviously people could look at. I'm not saying that's the only option, but that may be one way. I'm not wedded to that solution, but obviously if we can use things like technologies to do that, that'd be great.
When you talked about in the opening statement again the sort of views from your membership, could you talk to us a little bit more about that? So you said that was a survey a few years ago. How many people responded to that survey?
Rob?
Yeah, I'm happy to take that. Thanks, Chair. I believe the survey that we were referencing by majority in the opening statement was conducted around mid-2018, and from memory, I can take it on notice if you'd like an exact number, but I think it was around 2,500 responses.
Mm-hmm. How many members do you have at the moment?
Just over 2.7 million, I believe.
Still very healthy figures for the organisation.
And growing.
Yeah. And when you said that the overwhelming majority support tolling reform, was a particular question asked with a particular model for that tolling reform? Was there any more specifics around that question that you asked?
I'm happy to take that on notice, but I assume that there would have been some models proposed, certainly. Otherwise, there would not have been too much context behind that question.
Thank you. That would be really useful if you could take that on notice. And also the comment that most support user pays. It would be very useful to see how that question was asked as well, because I think you've got access to to some very valuable survey results, I would think, from your organisation. I think. Sorry, I'm just checking. I think that's probably all my questions for the moment. I just wanted to check if the opposition had any additional they wanted to take in this time, and then I will pass on to the government when it is their time.
What about the government having extra time?
Yeah, it's a coalition of the opposition.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I might turn firstly to ask whether any other views that you want to highlight out of that survey, and in particular to ask about the idea you referenced about potentially having multiple trip caps as part of a solution here.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Graham. I'm happy to take that. Ultimately, when we were talking about trip caps, again, we know that there are people who use roads and the motorway network on few occasions, and we know that there are users who rely on it almost on a daily basis. And so when you are putting together a new pricing model to effectively charge for roads, we don't want to have people disadvantaged, particularly if you look at, if we do put in price a full network charge at some point, we obviously need to give consideration to people who live in the regions, people who live in rural areas who are required to travel. And that's just one of the considerations that form part of an overall more equitable solution, so that people are actually paying for the usage and the value that they're deriving from using road assets.
And could the idea of a trip cap be part of getting frequent road users, particularly freight users, off suburban streets and into these tollways, as was originally promised?
Yeah, I think that's definitely part of the solution. I think those are all the things that need to be considered. Also, off-peak tolling and on-peak tolling is another thing that comes to mind, because ultimately we want to incentivize freight and trucks to use motorway networks. That's effectively what they are designed for. They're safer, but we also want to try and disaggregate light vehicles and heavy vehicles as well. And all of the levers and options that are available to support that should be looked at. Absolutely.
Yeah, and what is there a good example of where that is used in an overseas jurisdiction, where it has been used effectively to drive or shape congestion or the way traffic moves around a city?
I know there are some good examples in Europe, but I'm happy to take that on notice and provide a detailed response.
I think that'd be particularly helpful. As my colleague indicated, we have had reports, particularly as the M5 East toll came on, of trucks off these tollways onto suburban streets, and the committee's taken evidence about the fact that the pricing model, however it's been struck, is just not economic for some road freight operators, and that's what's driving this behaviour. You've referenced some evidence, some views from the NRMA. Can you give us any more detail about what you're hearing about how the decisions of these freight companies is being shaped by the cost of tolls?
Sure. Given that we are primarily on a day-to-day basis dealing with the motorist, heavy vehicles are not something that we are across in such detail. However, certainly from previous inquiries and progressively what we have seen, and particularly with the M5 East, is that there is evidence from Referral New South Wales and other advocacy groups to say that heavy vehicles are avoiding the toll roads. Whether that has been confined and it's maybe they see little benefit given potentially reduced traffic during COVID, or whether it's just a broader issue and they don't feel that using that toll road actually provides value across their chain, is something that we just don't know the detail of. But there's certainly evidence or anecdotal evidence to support trucks and heavy vehicles using local roads as opposed to being incentivized to use the new motorway. And
turning to commuter drivers, turning to consumers, more the consumer end of the market, do you think that is a similar dynamic for those drivers? What evidence can you refer us to as a committee about those drivers choosing to not head on the toll roads as was promised, but really choosing to hit suburban streets instead?
Sure. I think we probably need to do a little bit more detailed, we'll get some more detailed insights from members around that, but certainly from what we've seen through previous surveys is that the perception is definitely right throughout Western Sydney that there's a greater propensity to use local roads as opposed to use toll roads. And I think I referenced that in the opening statement. Western Sydney in particular were very much adverse to using toll roads because the general feel there, the perceived feel there is obviously that they don't provide value for their purposes. And that's part of this patchwork that we have now in place, given the fact that tolls have been put in place and motorways have been built on a project by project basis, and there's just inequity across the system. We need to look at rationalisation and then ultimately a model that is fair, that looks at the entire network, not just motorways too.
And I might return to that issue I raised, but I had to move on because of the time earlier. The NRMA's agreed that as part of the transparency for these tolling arrangements, it should be known, the public should know how much commuters are paying in tolls in total over the life of these contracts, but no minister in this government will answer that question. Can you shed any light on how much drivers are paying? We know there's now 1 million toll trips a day in Sydney. We know that drivers are paying more than $2 billion a year in tolls at the moment. Can you give us any information from your point of view? I'll be asking the government this again when they appear, but can you give us any guidance about how much drivers are paying, particularly in the west of Sydney in tolls, under some of these contracts?
Sure. In totality, I wouldn't say we know the figures, but we do know that in the northwest, in particular, pre-COVID, that there were motorists who were paying thousands and thousands of dollars per annum just on tolls, which is obviously kind of one component of the transport spend and one component of the family budget. And ultimately, if they deem that too much, it feels like it's too much, then we need to do something about it. And that is, we're not anti-tolls or anti-motorways, but I think that's again come about from this sort of patchwork approach that we now currently have, and hence why our strong position is that we need to provide more equity into the network to look after those people so that we all have a fair kind of access to this obviously important asset.
Those transport cost figures, which you reference national figures, can you give us any sense of how much is moving around the city in a whole range of ways? How much is transport costing in Sydney compared to, say, in Brisbane or Melbourne as a part of the household budget?
Yeah, it's more considerable in Sydney compared to any of the other cities, including for parking. If you look at Brisbane, has very expensive parking. Sydney is more so, and so transport costs are continuing to increase and become a greater percentage of the household budget. That's particularly true throughout Western Sydney, and again, that comes back to the equity issue. And so, when these concessions are put in place, ultimately, we would like to have more detail to underpin, I guess, public knowledge and public confidence in the projects, because private equity and private investment in the tolling network can provide significant benefits, but unless those are communicated, verified, it's very difficult, as you've seen in some of the comments that we made in the opening statement, for people to actually grasp the broader productivity benefits, the indirect benefits that come from motorways. And ultimately, if there was more knowledge and more transparency around the process, potentially independent oversight as well, people would then be more confident in what they're getting or what they're paying for.
And you've said that one of the priorities, if tolling prices were reformed, is to have a more progressive tolling regime. By that, I take it you mean the people who have the least access to public transport, the furthest to drive, might not also be paying the highest tolls. Is that, just give us some sense of what you would see as a more progressive or a fairer, maybe that's a better way to put it, a fairer tolling regime if this was reformed in some way, acknowledging how difficult that is.
Sure. Yeah, again, it comes back, what we would like to see ultimately is a road user charge, not just for the motorway network, but for the entire road network. That needs to look at a whole bunch of different factors to provide equity. It needs to consider postcodes, where people are living, where they're commuting, what distance they're traveling. It needs to potentially incentivize off-peak and on-peak freight. It needs to look at congestion, certainly within the Sydney CBD, and then also people's propensity to pay, and above that, I guess, the transport network as well, because we don't have equitable access depending on where people live to transport. So some people in Western Sydney at the moment, for example, are forced to drive, and that's some of the things that we've heard through member feedback. They've been forced to kind of use toll roads to get to work or to access education, social interactions, and those sorts of things. And so ultimately, we want everything on the table, and that includes talking with the private operators and looking at current concession contracts, including current tolls, and ultimately wrapping all of that up. That would be the sort of panacea approach from this point forward. Very difficult. The NRMA is absolutely committed to working with stakeholders, as I said, to make that happen, and the Parliament as well. Huge piece of reform, but I think an important piece of reform, so that we can get the settings correct, we can improve safety, can provide the necessary funding for road infrastructure for maintenance, but also transport as well. And then hopefully government can concentrate more of their budgets to more social type infrastructure.
Thank you.
Thank you. Government time, are we going to Mr. Mallard or to Mr. Farlow? Mr. Mallard.
Yeah, transfer our time to the opposition as well. Well,
thank you,
for
Mr.
giving
Mallard.
today. Well, you had 2 times the time. We'd never agreed to that, and it just skews the evidence of the report.
We can have a chat about that afterwards, Mr. Mallard.
Well, we didn't do a point of order because we're courteous to the guest, but we're pretty angry.
There is no point of order.
I didn't do one, so obviously there isn't one. So let's just get the principle right here. The NRMA supports the principle, as you have done for 20 or 30 years, of financing, bringing forward essential road infrastructure through the tolling finance model. That's the first question.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, good. You recognise that frees up finances for the state to invest in rural and regional roads, current program replacing all the wooden bridges, the costs of the Pacific Highway upgrade, the South Coast Highway upgrade, that we don't toll, that we can't toll, that aren't financeable in the private sector model, and the city people that use the city roads are by default supporting the ability to invest, as you're seeing at the moment, in rural and regional roads, which is so important to your members.
Thanks, I'm happy to take that. Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mallard. Yeah, I don't think there's any argument that having private sector involvement is a bad thing. We would strongly encourage it, and as you say, it has provided, I don't know the figure off the top of my head, but I'm assuming tens and tens of billions of dollars in motorway infrastructure in the Sydney or the Greater Sydney CBD over the past couple of decades, and that's critical. One of the things that is not generally highlighted in that spend is the indirect benefits that come from that investment. I think there's been some modelling done that suggests, I think on the current motorway network, that we perceive around a $5 billion per annum productivity benefit in the economy from having brought forward some of those projects that have been put in place with private and institutional funds. So there's no argument about that. It's the fact that they have just been done on a project by project basis, and that we now have a patchwork. We think that there's a better way to do it because there's current inequities in the pricing. We don't have an issue with the financing.
I think we acknowledge that it's used term patchwork, but of course, you know, in hindsight, of course, you could say we're going to do all these projects, but there was no appetite in the market and nor in politics. So we've got Labor did their couple, and we've done more. We've had a magic wand. We would try and get some sort of, balance going through tolling, so there's more logic to it. And I heard your comments on the time of day tolling in terms of managing demand. But I mean, I really want to hear your view on the fact that this method, Labor did it before. We used to be bipartisan. I don't know what's happened now. This method of financing infrastructure, which largely city-based motorists pay, releases capital for huge investments, which we've been doing in rural and regional roads, which is of huge benefit to your members. I mean, the fatality rates per kilometre on rural roads, per driver, sorry, are much higher than city roads. And we've been addressing those black spots and those overtaking spots and those blind corners in rural and regional roads. That's really important.
Yeah, absolutely critical. It is, and since just before the 2019 election, we did a huge piece on road funding and road maintenance because local councils just didn't have the capacity to fix up those roads, and a lot of them were poor, classified as poor or in very poor condition, which we thought was obviously a major safety issue and also an issue for the regions and for rural motorists. And so we went to that election with a policy to upgrade all of those roads to at least a satisfactory standard, which required a $1 billion plus investment. I'm happy to say that it was Minister Pavey at the time from the government who adopted that policy in full, and that has been subsequently funded through New South Wales budgets. And so now we have a record amount of funding going to regional roads, and the federal government have obviously also contributed to that process through COVID-19 stimulus funds. But obviously, yeah, critical that we have a minimum investment or more investment in the regions. We would like to see more, and we'd like to see that continue and ultimately put in place not just funding in the short term, but ultimately put in place a model where particularly councils can look after the local road network and make it sustainable over the long term, because all of those safety benefits lead to productivity and economic benefits, not just for the rural and regional areas, but also Greater Sydney as well.
My colleagues want to ask some questions, but I want to just touch on, because it's been misrepresented a lot in the media, the 4% increase on some of the tolls, not all of them, some of them. And earlier in your evidence, and I really want to get this on the record really strongly, you talked about the levers when you're going to the marketplace to finance a multi-billion-dollar motorway. So the levers are, let's go through it again, the government commitment up front, so that's cash up front, I assume you're saying, right?
Government or private.
Right. The period of the concession, 20 years or 30 years or 50 years, 6 years, the rate that we've set the initial toll, and obviously the volume of traffic we've analysed will hit that road, and then that 4%. It's being compared to, it keeps being compared to inflation. It has nothing to do with inflation. That's a setting to adjust to meet the market what they wanted. But if we took the 4% off and we set it at 1%, either the period would be longer or the tolls would be higher. That would impact upon the project finances.
Can I make this clear? You're correct. There are 3 or 4 levers, and each of them obviously need to be looked at. Obviously, when negotiations are taking place, all those factors come into play. The issue is not the 4%. The issue is what is the total cost to the end user. And obviously, as we said, there's 4 components to that, and the indexation is just one. Yes, there are discussions about what that escalation rate should be. I'm also aware that some commentators made a view: is there a better indexation rate to use something like a roads or bridge construction index on that? So obviously there's a lot of discussion about how this could be done better. Yeah, but at the end of the day, those 4 levers are all used intertwined to give you that in answer. So if you end up with a very low CPI, if you end up with, say, no escalation, you're going to have to make it up in those 2 or 3 other levers.
It was never meant to reflect CPI. It's a financing model. Yes. Yeah. So it's packaged up by merchant bankers, Treasury, trying to get the right deal going to get the billions of dollars like we've got for WestConnex for the infrastructure. So, otherwise, we wouldn't get the financing.
Yeah, just to add, it's part of the financing model, Mr. Mallard, and I think we need to obviously disaggregate it from that connection with CPI, because ultimately that's not a major consideration when those financing terms are put together. It's a little bit like talking about a road user charge for EVs and the people that tie that to federal fuel excise. They are essentially different things.
All right. I just want to, before I hand over to Mr. Fang and Mr. Fowler, just want to touch on some of your evidence earlier, which was that Western Sydney motorists don't see value in the tollways. I mean, born and raised in Western Sydney, I'm coming to you now from Western Sydney. I'll be on the tollway later today to come down for estimates. But I mean, the first toll that applies on to Western Sydney is is east of Parramatta, excepting if they go on the M7, which was a Labor-built tollway. They don't seem to talk about that one much, but a Labor-built tollway. But except if so, it's east of Parramatta. So it's hard to say that people in Western Sydney don't get benefit from the motorway. The M4 motorway, we put $600 million into the Smart Motorway project. It's just about finished. To an additional lane each direction, modern interchanges to try and reduce congestion, and it's really working very well. So there's been great investment in Western Sydney without tolls. It's just that part which is sort of connected to the M5 east of Parramatta. Do you acknowledge that? I mean, I'm not sure we're talking about paying for money to a motorway.
Yeah, no, I think you may have misinterpreted the results or the statement a little bit. What we were referring to is definitely not the majority of people in Western Sydney. That's some of the data that we've got and some of the insights that we get through our member surveys, that the Western Sydney region, and to a slightly lesser extent, the Southwest and the Northwest, perceive that they're disadvantaged by toll roads. That doesn't mean the majority. In fact, the majority of NRMA members support having toll roads in place because they understand the benefits that are derived from that. And the main thing is obviously the time saving. That's the most critical.
I still remember the Great Western Highway, Parramatta Road drive to get to Fairfax. When I went to Fairfax in the 80s and early 90s, I had to drive in because of late hours. Like that, as each bit of the motorway opened, and it was, the toll was always east of Parramatta. It was removed and put back. That was a blessing, and we ended up being choked with traffic as well because people just spoke by their consumer habit. That's more an editorial comment. I'll pass over to my colleague Wes Fang, and I'm sure we're going to get extra time from the chair.
Thank you. I thought Mr. Farlow probably had some more pressing questions, but I'm happy to ask mine unless Mr. Farlow's.
You can go first, Wes. It's fine.
Thank you. So I've just got two questions that I really was hoping to get addressed. I noted the questions from the opposition around the 4%, and as my colleague, the Honourable Shane Mallard mentioned, the 4% indexing on tolls. When that was first introduced by the New South Wales government back a number of years ago, was the NRMA critical of that? And was there, I guess, representations made to the government of the day around that issue? Are you aware? I think you might be on mute.
Sorry, I was just going to, Mr. Fang, I was just going to refer that question to my learned colleague, given that I was not at NRMA at the time.
Yeah, I just yeah. I need to take it on notice. Obviously, the NRMA had the concerns about the indexation. How it's calculated, and obviously that's always been an issue. And yes, there has been discussions with government about it.
Yeah. No, I was just curious because the 4% indexing on tolling was actually introduced by a Labor government, and so I'm finding it interesting now that having been introduced by Labor, the Labor opposition are now criticising it on tolling when it is in fact when they were in government it was introduced. And I'm just wondering what representations the NRMA have made to that government on the day, and what response was received around that. So if you've taken the question on notice, and I very much appreciate that, because I'd be keen to see what response they gave you at the time. Just turning to the EV distance-based tolling issues. We know that in New South Wales, for example, we've looked to introduce that, but we've delayed its introduction until 2027, or a percentage of the EV sales are actually, the total market are achieved before that comes in. We know that Victoria, on the other hand, has actually introduced it already. Have you got any experience from your colleagues at RSEV? Have they provided you any feedback about how its operation is going in Victoria?
Thanks, Mr. Fang. I think at this point, it's probably a little bit too early to tell, given the uptake of EV at the moment. I think what we are aware of is some of the anecdotal evidence that we've seen through the public and through the media, if you like. We were very, very strongly advocating as an organisation for the support of electric vehicles. And yes, while we support road user charging reform and ultimately a price on vehicles to use roads, more importantly was supporting electric vehicles because of the broader economic benefits that they bring. At the time, we were certainly pushing the New South Wales government, advocating that nothing was put in place until at least 1 July 2025. The government went a little bit further than that, which was welcomed, and we think they've got it right. The package that they have put together is nation leading, and it's potentially arguably world leading in terms of support for EVs, and so we supported that announcement strongly. We think that they took the right position, and that will ultimately give us a competitive advantage as a state.
So the partnership we've got around the charging network, ironically with the NRMA, with the New South Wales government, and the delaying of the introduction of the road user charge, you see as positives. And the criticism that we've seen during that debate of people, say, on the crossbench, and members who were, I guess, indicating that it was hampering EV take-up. It's not supported. It's not a supported view by the NRMA. Is that correct?
Certainly, if we put in place a charge that was implemented today, a little bit like Victoria have done, the membership showed that that would severely impact people's propensity to purchase electric vehicles, and given that and the broader economic benefits that we know will come from a transition to EVs, that's why we were so strongly advocating for that to be delayed until they can effectively stand up on their own 2 feet. And that's why we were supportive of also rolling in, looking at registration charges, looking at stamp duty, because ultimately we want to simplify the process, get to a road user charge, but absolutely not have it as an impediment to EVs, and much preferably have it as a support or incentivizing mechanisms, because the faster we transition our fleet to electric, we're doing the right thing for the environment.